Thank you very much, Reb Shimon. And especially thank you for the honor of being able to speak here tonight in Schus of Rabbi Strux. How would you answer the following question? It was this past Pesach, and I was talking to a shliach who's actually older than I am, but we're friends. And he tells me the following problem. He and his friends now have kids who are becoming bachrim. From boys, they're now blossoming into big bachrim. They're learning in yeshiva. And one fellow shliach tells him, he says, listen, the last thing we need is our kids to look at us. Let them stay in yeshiva the whole week, the whole month, the whole year. The best thing we could do is to just not ruin what the yeshiva is doing. The best thing we could do is to stay out of it. Then he says he has friends who are also businessmen. And they feel that they feel dejected. They feel that they're not shaykh, they're not capable of being a dugma chaya, being a living example for their kids. They work hard the whole day, they're out of the house. They come have time to learn Rambam and Chitas. Who's talking about learning davening barichas? How are such people, he's talking about himself, how is he supposed to be a dugma chaya, a living example for his kids? And then finally, you have some people who really want to, but to no fault of their own, they were not zoiche to have a Yiddish chinuch all their life. Okay, you'll have several minutes definitely to think up what the answer to such a question is. There's something strange about tzaras, which is the topic of this week's parsha. There are three types of tzaras. A person could become inflicted either on his body, his skin or his hair, on his clothing, or on his house. The Rambam writes that the cause for all three types of tzaras was lashon hara. Then the Rambam continues, what would they do with someone who had tzaras? If the tzaras was on his body or his skin, they would send him into solitary confinement. Why? Because his lashon hara, his gossip that he spoke, caused separation between people. People who used to respect each other no longer do. Husband and wife are no longer as close as they should be. So what we do to him is we separate him from his people. If the tzaras was on his clothing, we burn his clothing. And if the tzaras is on his house, we demolish his house. The question is, what do we gain by this? It sounds like it's just outright revenge. And especially, I could understand separating him from other people because he separated others. But what do we gain by burning his clothes or tearing down his house? Hold that thought. Before we get into the actual topic of being a role model, they say a story about a father who was learning with his child, Chumash. So he tells his son, "Nu, tell me, who broke the luchas?" So his kid says, "Tati, okay, whatever my teacher told you, it's not true. I did not do it." So his father gets furious. The next morning, he runs right up to the teacher and he says, "This is what kind of chinuch you're giving my kid? I ask him who broke the luchas and he tells me it wasn't him." So the teacher says, "Listen, I know your kid. I was his teacher for a while. If he says he didn't do it, he didn't do it." Now the father's mamish and kas. He huffs and puffs over to the principal's office. And he tells the principal, "Is this what kind of chinuch you're giving my kid? This is what kind of teacher he has? I asked my kid who broke the luchas and he tells me it wasn't him." So the principal says, "Listen, I know the teacher and I know the kid. He's a good kid. If he says he didn't do it, he didn't do it." Luckily, the biggest gvir of the school was in the office right then and there, the biggest patron of the school. And he looks at the father and he says, "Listen, I see you're upset that someone broke your luchas. Don't worry, send me the bill, I'll pay for it." Baruch Hashem, we are blessed with many good moistus chinuch in Crown Heights. But the moistus themselves will tell us that as parents, we have a responsibility to be a dugma chaya for our children. Chassidus explains that the necessities of a person are split up into three categories or three columns. The terms of Chassidus are Pnimi, Makif HaKarev, and Makif HaRachik. Pnimi means things that we ingest and that we digest. An example for that is food and drink. Makif HaKarev are things that are close to us, they fit us, and they surround us, but we don't ingest them, like clothing. Makif HaRachik are things that surround us, like a house. The analogy goes further, also into the influence that's made upon us. The influence can be split into three categories. The pneumistic influence is that of a teacher or a parent teaching their children. They prepare the material as if they're preparing food. If the child is small, they prepare something that's digestible for a small child. And so too, as the child gets older, they prepare what that child needs. Likewise, a pnimisdik chinuch, an inner chinuch, something that the mechanech wants the child to absorb and to digest internally in a pnimisdik way, the teacher has to know who the child is and know what to expect of that child. I must say that Rabbi Strux, in this regard, was an expert. First of all, the way he prepared his classes, and each student could attest to the fact that he made it interesting, and to each level and each class, he thought many, many times of how to teach it. And after he passed away, his children showed us some of the notes that he wrote, which were fascinating. One example of just how he knew and understood every single student is that he made a campaign to learn Tanya Baal Peh. It was very exciting, and I myself got very motivated because of it to learn Tanya Baal Peh. Well, first my younger brother did, and then I got jealous of him, so that's when I started doing it. One day he saw that I was in the classroom during lunch recess. Everyone went down to the field to play ball, and I stayed in the class. So he comes over to me on his way down to the field, because he always went down with us, and he says, "Motty, what are you doing here?" So I told him that I had planned to finish a certain amount of Tanya this week, and I needed the time during break. So he smiled, Rabbi Strux smiled with his big mustache, and he says, "Motty, there's a time for everything. Now you have to go play ball." The next category of influence or chinuch is makif hakarev, something that surrounds us, but it's close, it's fit to size. And that is the concept of a dugma chaya, a living example, a role model. Like clothing, it has to fit, but it's on the outside. Makif hakarev, a dugma chaya, a living example, one could serve for many. Like the Rabbi would tell many times the shluchim who went out to yeshivas, your job is to serve as a role model of what a bacher is supposed to look like. One shliach is meant to show the whole yeshiva of what a shliach is supposed to, what a bacher is supposed to look like. In this regard also, Rabbi Strux also taught us by example. I just noticed that there's a book on the table where some students wrote things, and you can tell I'm not making it up because they wrote the same thing. One such example was Rabbi Strux's car. We used to call his car, I don't remember the exact term, but it was something like the magical car or something. Little did we know that he always bought second-hand junkers, but to us, his car was magical. Why was this? Because whenever it snowed in Morristown, and he had that long driveway from Tikva all the way up to Yeshiva, somehow his car was always the first one up the hill. The snow could have been up to Yehupitz. Rabbi Strux was the first one out of his spot and the first one up to Yeshiva. So instead of just preaching of how important chinuch is, how important going to school every single day is, he showed us how important it was. There was no excuse for canceling school, even on a snow day. The third example of the third category, I should say, of influence in the term of Chassidus is makif harachik, which means it's something that encompasses us like a house on the outside. And that's what Chassidus calls a sviva, surrounding, an atmosphere. The environment that a child grows up in has a tremendous impact on him. The environment includes the school that he goes to, the shul where his father davens, the friends and the family whom his parents choose to spend time with. And yet again, Rabbi Strux also had an art in creating an atmosphere. One example was his classroom. Rabbi Strux's classroom, when just by sitting in there, you felt a sense of order, decorum, respect. In fact, Rabbi Markowitz is sitting here, he could attest to the fact that other teachers would send their students, their troublemakers, to sit in Rabbi Strux's class. That was the punishment. And it was the worst punishment. Because you didn't do anything there. You just sat in his classroom and you felt a presence of respect. He didn't have to tell you a word. Just being in his presence, you felt it. When he made a mitzvah, Tanya Baal Peh, collecting Rebbe pictures, whatever it was, even preparing the Lag BaOmer barbecue, he had this way of creating a beautiful atmosphere that you wanted to be a part of. He would walk in Friday and his line was usually, Hayom Kotzer v'hamalacha meruba. It's a short day and there's a lot to get done. As soon as he said that, the whole class felt like a rush. We have so much to get done today. We have Seder Nagunim, we have to learn Trap, we have a Dvar Torah. If you take these three categories, the Pnimi, something which is more of an inner, very interactive relationship between the giver and the taker, then there's Makif HaKarev, the closer one, and Makif HaRachik, the more distant one. They actually could be applied to the very concept of role model itself, of a Dugma Chaya itself. The conventional way of understanding Dugma Chaya means where I show someone how to behave. I do something and he learns from my behavior. He learns from my example, which children very much need this, like everybody else. We need to see that what's being preached is also being practiced. They say a story about Aristotle. Now, Aristotle was, one of the things he was known for was for preaching on ethics and morals. He was different than his teacher, Plato, or his predecessors, in that they believed that ethics was more of a theoretical idea, and he used to preach that it's a practical way of life. So the Rebbe said the following story out of Farbrengen, that once Aristotle was found by one of his students doing something which was less than moral. So his student mustered up the courage, and he said, with all due respect, Harav, Aristotle, you preach all the time about not doing such things. How could you do this? To which Aristotle answered, now I'm not Aristotle. Kids can't handle that. Neither can adults. If you're preaching something, show me how to practice it. Likewise, from when Baruch Hashem we're blessed to have either our own kids or our own students, we don't have that luxury, we don't want that luxury of saying, now I'm not a father, or now I'm not a teacher. We are parents and we're teachers 24/7, and the kids will pick up on everything. Just to illustrate the power of an example, of a living example, the first level of living example in a pneumistic way is from my father, and the story is as follows. In the mid-90s, Tafshin Nuns, so Lubavitch came out with a campaign called the Good Campaign, and they created something called the Good Card. It was a card that was the size of a credit card. The color was like a reddish color that the sky looks by dawn. And on the back was written something to the effect of adding in acts of goodness and kindness. My father was very active, like in all the Mivtzoyim. He was very active in distributing these cards. He would give them to everybody, to the clerk in the bank, to the attendant by the gas station, to our mailman. Everyone got one from him. Anyhow, the night was Yud Shvat Tavshin Nun Hey. My parents drove to a wedding in New Jersey, and my sister and I stayed home to babysit the two younger ones. We were both 13 at the time. Middle of the night, the doorbell rings. We go to the door, and standing there are two highway patrolmen. They had bad news for us. There was a terrible accident, and As he's saying this, he pulls out a wallet, and he asks us if we recognize the wallet. So at this time, you can imagine what we looked like. My sister says, yeah, that's my father's wallet. Now get this part of the story. She takes the wallet from him, and instinctively she opens up the wallet. Through her tears, she takes out 2 good cards, and she gives one to each one of the cops. And she said, my father wants you to have one of these. While she's crying, she said this. Now that I think back at this, I realize how, maybe it's comical, I don't know. She just found out that her father was killed in a car accident. And what does she do instinctively? She takes out a card that says, do acts of goodness and kindness, and she gives it to that very cop. The only way I could explain this is that she saw my father doing this time and time again, and it just became part of her. My father never preached, give out good cards. It was his thing. He never told us to do it. So practically, the first level of Dugma Chaya means when our children observe exactly what we do in a very close, interactive way. Our children watch how we speak. They watch how we're dressed. They watch how we respect others, our spouses, our parents. The Rebbe once said by a Farbrengen that a child looks at how his father respects his father in heaven, and from that the child learns a lesson how he should respect his own father. So children pick up on everything, and it's going to be that 5% if we ever choose to become not Aristotle for those 5 seconds a day, our children are going to pick that up. The next level, Makif HaKodev. Makif HaKodev means that I'm acting as a role model, but it's not in a very interactive, pnimiyazdik, direct way. Now we could go back to that shliach. The shliach has a question. He doesn't feel, or the businessman, the shliach, the Baal Tshuva, who doesn't feel that he has what it takes to show his child. He feels inadequate. How is he supposed to be a role model? So this happened back in communist Russia. There was a Chassidish shul, a very large shul, and it was Yom Kippur. The shul was empty. It was a very exact minyan, and the minyan was made up of a bunch of cripples, invalids, and old people. Why was this? Because everyone had to work. There was no excuses. What happened was, as Yom Kippur was coming to an end, it was time for Ne'ilah. All of a sudden, the whole shul started filling up. By the time the Rav got up onto the bima to give his speech, the shul was packed wall to wall. And the Rav said as follows: 2 people once came to me with a din Torah over a chicken. And each one claimed that the chicken had run away from his farm. What did I do? I took the chicken with those 2 people, and I walked outside to the road that connects the 2 farms. And I tied the legs of the chicken. Then I told the 2 Yidden, I'm going to put the chicken down on the floor, on the road, and then I'm going to untie his legs. He sees 2 roads in front of him. Whichever road he chooses to run to, you'll know that that's who he belongs to. And Karchaba, that's what he did. Then the Rav looks up to the heavens, and he says, Ribono shel olam, look at your kindlech. The entire day, their legs were tied up. They couldn't come to shul, not because they didn't want to. They were not allowed to. But then, look what happens when their legs are untied. The moment those chains were taken off their legs, they had 2 roads in front of them. They could have gone home and relaxed, but instead they chose to come here to shul to daven to you. And with that, he began davening Ne'ilah. A parent may not always be able to show the child how to learn a Tosfos. But picture this. The child sees and knows that his father is on shlichus. He knows he wakes up 6 o'clock for the first minyan. He knows that sometimes he's doing that after being woken up 2 o'clock in the morning to do a tada on a body that has to fly to Eretz Yisrael. Then he knows that the rest of the day his father is either learning with another Yid, collecting money for the next program, or putting up a mezuzah in somebody's house. And then he notices something. The father finally winds down his day, and he finally has a few extra moments. What does his father gravitate to? He opens a sefer. His father makes a siyum out of Pesach. He's learning Soita during Sfira. He opens a Likutei Torah Shabbos in the morning. Or how about if a father is a businessman working very hard the entire week, and his son notices that after coming home from a very tired day, he's exhausted. He picks himself up and walks to a shir. Or he opens up a sefer in the house. What's registering in that child's mind now is what are you supposed to do with free time? You're supposed to use it out to learn Torah. That father's half hour that he's learning is just as difficult and just as precious as the 6 hours that the child's Rosh Hashiva is learning. And that's all that the kid needs to see. He needs to see that his father, when his feet are untied, he runs right away to do what he expects of his son. It goes further because a child also wants to know who is it that his father respects? Who does his father look up to? Who does his father talk about? When his parents say stories, who do they say stories about? Is it business personalities, sports personalities, politicians, or is it Rabbanim, Chassidim, and Rabbeim? When they finally come home from yeshiva and they're sitting by the table, do they feel that their father, their parents, want to know, what are you fabring about in yeshiva? What was your last shir about? That's the element of makif hakariv, a dugma chayim being makif hakariv. It's something which is close to the child, but it's a little more distant because you don't show him an actual example. The third element is makif harachik, something which is really far. Many people are actually practicing that right here tonight. Sometimes we show an example by not being home. The Rebbe once said, parents have an achrayus to teach their children about chinuch and giving tzedakah, davening, and learning Torah. Giving tzedakah, you want to teach your children how we always give tzedakah even if we don't have money. Learning Torah is the kedusha of everything. And then the Rebbe came to davening. How does a father teach his child to daven like a chassid? If the father stays in shul and davens barichas on Shabbos when he has an opportunity to do so. The question is, what is the child learning exactly? The child's home playing tag with his siblings while his father's davening barichas. They're just waiting for kiddush. What's he learning exactly? Or take today's Hayom Yom. Today's Hayom Yom says that farbrengens are supposed to be generally in shul. If the farbrengen was at home and the kid saw the mess, he heard the nagunim and he got to clean up the brechta the next day, that's a chinuch. But his father's in shul farbrengen, what does he gain from that? The answer is that the child just has this understanding that his father went to do something important. To his father, davening is so important that he's not home because he's davening. The lack of his father's presence at home has that tremendous impact on him. The same applies with the father leaving during the week to go to a shir. I have two chavedim here in Crown Heights that can how to work very hard, and each one of them go regularly on Miftzah Mezuzah. They have a choice. They don't have the official title as of shluchim. Their official title is businessmen. But yet, when their legs are untied and they're able to go back to their house, where do they choose to go? They spend time with their family, and then they go off to do the Rebbe's Miftzayim because they have an extra minute in their day. These are the three levels of Dugma Chaya. Now, if we could go back to the question on Tzaras. The question was, there are three types of tzaras, on the body, on the clothes, and on the house. What do we gain by punishing the person, by sending him out of the camp, burning his clothes, or tearing down his house? The answer is that if someone talks gossip, talks lashon hara about somebody else, so let's think for a second who that somebody else is, and what is going to be the repercussion of that gossip. There are people could fit into these same three categories. There are people who are the body, meaning they're in positions of giving over to people and influencing people on a pneumistic way. There are people who fit into the category of being clothing. They're like clothing because they are role models for other people. And then there's a third category of not even people, it's just organizations or general people. Askanim. So now, if someone speaks lashon hara about a child's teacher, or a child's mashpia, what's going to happen? He just separated the child from his teacher and his mashpia. He caused a break between two people. He stopped the relationship. So the Torah says, look at yourself. You see your own body got inflicted with saras. That tells you on what you need to reflect. So the Bezdin tells this person, go out of the camp and you're going to be all alone. And when you're all alone, you're going to know what it feels like to be alone. You're going to know what it feels like to be without a mashpia, without a teacher. And likewise, you're going to know what it's like to be without the opportunity of being mashpia or being a friend. The same thing with clothing. If someone talks lashon hara about someone else's role model, there goes the respect. Children don't have who to respect anymore because everyone who they thought they respected, you bashed down, you threw down on the floor. The only thing we could do for such a person is to teach him that he should understand what it's like not to have this. We burn his clothes, figuratively speaking. And finally, the third thing is if people just bash moistus, this school is terrible, this shul is terrible, this community is terrible, the whole country should just go up in flames. How are our kids supposed to react to that? So the one thing we could do for such a person is take away his home, take away his environment, have him understand what it's like to live without a sviva. And when any of these mitzrayim have this feeling, in other words, it registers, the tshuva penetrates, you can be sure that when they return back to the camp, they're going to do whatever they can to strengthen all these three elements of Pnimi, Makiv, and Makiv Harachik. Just to end off, someone once said a very good word. They made videos to demonstrate to children of how the Rebbe is a dugma chaya. What's strange, though, the videos are great. They have a dugma chaya there of how the Rebbe davens, how the Rebbe cares for every yid, obviously Yisrael, and the list goes on and on and on. There's one thing that's not included in those videos, and at Vice Dice, it seems like it's our responsibility to teach that to our children, and that is how much Torah the Rebbe learned. The Rebbe means teacher. So the Rebbe showed us a dugma chaya in everything. One of my mashpiyim told me, and I'll end off with this, that it used to be that one of the best ways was teaching by example. Today, it's the only way. So may the Eibishter help that in the schus of this gathering, and the schus of everyone who came out tonight, the schus of everyone putting their efforts into chinuch, and all the years that Rabbi Strux put into chinuch, we should all be zeichet to have success in the chinuch that we try to implement, healthy, and may this all be the last deed that's needed to tip the scale and bring Mashiach. Shkoyach.